So today I'm going to be talking about Anita de Monte Laughs Last by Xochitl Gonzalez. The novel explores themes around power, love, feminism, race and art. But before we begin, it is good to know that this novel is based on real life people, mainly the artist Ana Mendieta. She was a performance artist, sculptor and painter, best known for incorporating her own body into her work, often set in nature. Tragically, she is also known for her death in 1985 at the age 36, where she fell or was pushed out of an apartment window. At the time of her death, Anna was married to sculptor Carl Andre, who was charged at the time with her murder. He faced trial 3 years later in 1988 and was acquitted. And all of those things are covered within this novel, but it is important to note that in essence, this book is using that real life story as a jumping off point to explore the unheard voices, to explore the disappeared voices from art history of artists of colour, but mainly female artists of colour. It's a novel that's raising awareness that the history books or the art history books seem to only look at old white men documenting the work of old white men, and that there are those voices out there that have been completely squashed or taken away from the art history books. And this book is sort of enlivening that debate around who are these artists who have been forgotten. The book starts in 1985 and a kind of rising star artist, Anita de Monte, is found dead in New York City. Her tragic death initially becomes the talk of the town, but over time Anita's voice slowly fades into obscurity. The novel then jumps to 1988, in which we follow Raquel, an art history student who is preparing for her final thesis. At university, Anita feels like an outsider as she is surrounded by very privileged students who seem to have this sort of predetermined career set out for them within the arts. This is due to kind of money or their family connections. As a student of colour in the late 90s, Raquel is finding herself having to work harder for the same opportunities as everyone else. And structurally, the novel jumps back and forth between the late 90s and the mid 80s. Anita de Monte's husband, Jack, is accused of murdering her, of pushing her, and we get how they came to meet each other, their experiences, their lives together. In the 80s sections, we also get kind of the perspective of Jack and his views towards his wife and towards his career, but we mainly stick with Anita and kind of, her sections sort of jump around between sort of like being in the present and being in the past, how they met, how she died, and even past her death. Jumping back to the 90s with Raquel, she starts a relationship with a very well-connected older art student. And overnight, this relationship helps her rise socially within the university. And it's at this point we can start to see this kind of blending and the connections between the story set in the 80s with Anita and the story set in the late 90s with Raquel, the kind of similarities of their position. Anita obviously becoming more famous and rising to fame, maybe because of her relationship with the very famous sculptor Jack. I just want to add in a quick correction. Anita wasn't only famous and didn't only succeed within the arts world because of her relationship with her husband Jack. That's not what this novel is saying at all. Being with Jack does help her social status. Being with Jack does allow her to go to parties and be in rooms where a lot of the art dealers and the opportunities are, but it is her own determination and her own drive that sort of advances her art career. She and she alone is getting these commissions. So there is a bit of a balance there. The novel is letting us see that kind of like the parties allow her this access to this world she wouldn't have had access to, but it is her own talent, her own determination and drive that gets her all the opportunities. And in fact, the novel lets us see how jealous Jack gets of this sort of rising fame that she has, rising fame that she has. So I just want to put that correction in there. But also Raquel kind of propelling herself through the social rankings of university due to her relationship with her very well connected and very privileged boyfriend. Whilst Raquel is researching for her thesis, she stumbles across Anita's story. She does this as she is initially researching Jack, the famous sculptor, who her lecturer, her advisor, is obsessed with. But somehow, for some reason, her story, Anita's story, the trial, her death, has been completely left out of all of her lectures, and she gets very, very angry. And at this point, she starts to understand the sort of the links there are between Anita de Monte's story and her own, and how things really haven't changed. She really starts to question the dynamics of her own relationships. And that's kind of it. That's kind of what this book is about. I hope I haven't given away too many plot points. I have missed off one major thing, and I really don't know how to talk about it for spoilers. But this book has magical realism within it. And I think it's very obvious from the start when we start getting Anita de Monte's sections, we know right off the bat that this is being narrated sort of from the grave, that Anita de Monte is narrating her story after she has died. We understand that from the very start, so I don't think that's a spoiler. So we do have this kind of magical realism aspect in which we have Anita de Monte as a sort of ghost within her story. I'm not going to give away too much more than that, but yeah, so there are magical realism aspects linked within this novel. So what did I like and what didn't I like? What I liked. I really enjoyed both of the protagonists in this novel. I thought they were written extremely well. They have very clear sort of voice in each of their sections, but at the same time, they're written in a way that does allow those little overlaps, and I thought that was balanced brilliantly all the way through. I really like this novel is based on a true story. I don't know how many of the details are in fact correct or incorrect, but I do know that this novel has forced me to research Ana Mendieta and look into her life and her work. It has brought her to life almost, and it is doing what the book has set out to do. It is allowing this artist's voice to sort of resonate through time. And I didn't know anything about her, so yeah, I like that it's kind of forced me to do that. I really liked how this novel was structured, the kind of dual narrative timelines that are sort of flowing and jumping back and forth. I felt like the pacing was absolutely perfect. Every time I felt like the section needed to maybe shift or jump, it did. So I really liked the way it was structured, the jumping back and forth. And I really liked in the 1980s sort of sections with Anita de Monte, I really liked how she was also within her sections jumping back and forwards in time. And I also thought it was a really smart decision to include Jack's voice within this novel, giving him a voice and allowing almost his perspective on everything that was happening. Even though the book paints him out to be a complete and utter piece of shit, it doesn't really try that hard to give him too much nuance. It still allows his sort of perspective within the novel, which just makes it even more interesting. I also like that this novel is quite bold in what it's saying. Like, it's not really hiding what it thinks about what happened to the real life Ana Mendieta. It really isn't. Obviously, you can read this book and not know any of that other stuff and still enjoy it for what it is. But it is making some very bold choices, some big statements. I don't know if she's gotten into trouble at all with this novel. But yeah, with what she's saying, she's really going there. She is making accusations, and and I appreciate her being bold and going there. And my final like, and this is also, it's a bit of a dislike, but you'll get what I mean, and I'll break it down further in my dislikes, but the magical realism of this novel does add something to it. It elevates it. And I think what it does quite smartly is it firmly places this book as a piece of fiction. So to anyone who might be misconstruing that this is kind of like, based on the real life artist, or this is kind of, this is a statement on what actually did happen, I do feel like the magical realism elements within it is a kind of safety net for the writer to be like, no, this is a piece of fiction. And I enjoyed, for the most part, what the magical realism aspects brought to this novel. What didn't I like? Okay, so the first thing I didn't like, and this is a little bit of a cheat because I don't know if I didn't like it, it's just something I wish had maybe been explored a bit more, is that there's a very short amount of distance between the Raquel story and the Anita de Monte story, like 13 years, something like that. And I feel like there's a little bit of a missed opportunity. If the timeline had been greater, then we might have been able to explore a little bit more what has changed, but the things that are still the same. And maybe more artists' voices could have come into play, and this novel could have been a little bit richer. So I don't know if that's necessarily a dislike. I feel like the distance between them didn't exactly damage the novel at all, but it felt like something. I just kept thinking to myself, well, they're so close together, But yeah, anyway, that's just a little thing, a personal thing, but I felt like that could have been explored more. The next thing I didn't like, and this is quite a big one for me, this is the thing that really, really damaged the book, is that the Raquel sections at university are incredibly cliche. So her journey, her experience, and what she is saying politically with her story, what her story is actually doing is vital, absolutely vital, and I think crucial. And all of those things that I got from it, from her sort of her culture, her heritage, and her place in university, really bring to life the 1980s story. But my God, there are some sections in her sort of like, there's like bullying scenes and her relationship and the cliche things that happen within her relationship. They're just, you have read them 1,000 times before. And it's the main thing that is damaging this book, is that I was just like, this is so boring. These things have been done so many times before. Like the sections where she's chatting to her tutor, her personal tutor and things like that, they are really good. But all of the kind of like surrounding university friendshipy type things, yeah, I was just a bit like, I've read these 1,000 times before. I'm a little bit bored by these cliches. I don't think it's the writer's fault. Those things do exist within university, but yeah, I just felt like we could have got something a little bit different and we didn't. The next thing I disliked is the magical realism. I don't think was blended as well as it could have been. Now, I never thought I'd say that because I am a massive fan of magical realism. If you look over my past reviews, you will see that some of my favourite books ever have elements of magical realism within them. But yeah, the blending for me just didn't quite work with this one. It comes in quite late to the novel, maybe around the midway point, if not a little bit later, or it sort of solidifies itself within the story around the midway point. And yeah, it just, I don't know, everything else is so based in realism. Everything else is following such a kind of stylistic choice that the magical realism within it just sort of jolts everything a little bit. I think she's done a decent job to make it blend as best as she could, but it just, for me, it didn't quite sit right. And I think your mileage may vary. You may absolutely hate it, you may absolutely love it, but for me, it just wasn't quite right. And my final dislike is the ending is way too rushed for my personal tastes. Everything is building towards this kind of realization. And I think it's very obvious from the start that the two storylines are going to sort of like converge at some point. And how they do that and how deeply they do that is the kind of like, the mystery, the fun of the novel. But we do know from the start that there's going to be some sort of crossover taking place. And it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds towards it. And it's not until very late on that sort of things sort of happen in that regard. And then before you know it, the novel's done. And I felt like everything sort of wrapped up, everything, the resolution of everything was just way too quick. I wanted to explore the sort of nuances of the discoveries that happened in the latter half way more, like way more. And I can sort of, this is a more commercial novel, it is for a kind of wider audience, and I can see why it might not be exploring some of these things a little bit deeper. But yeah, just my own personal tastes, that ending was way too rushed. I wanted way more time. But that's it for my dislikes, and overall, I thought this novel was very good and I had a really good time reading it, and I'm really glad I read it, and I'm glad how it forced me to do a little bit of research. Any novel that forces me to get on Google and start researching and sort of gathering ideas and figuring out things myself gets a big thumbs up from me. It has got quite a few things in it that I didn't quite gel with, but they are very minor things. So I'm landing on like a 3.5, possibly 4-star with this one. I think it's more of a 3.5. I think it's very good. It's a very easy read. It's entertaining, and it has got heart and politics within it. And it's driving to say something. And I think what it says is quite bold in what it's saying, but I think it gets its point across really, really well. So yeah, like 3.5, very good. But depending on the day, I could maybe shift that into a 4. Anyway, have you read Anita de Monte Laughs Last? And what did you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Please let me know in the comments below. And of course, I hope you're all well. I hope you're all enjoying whatever you might be reading. And I'll see you all on the next one.